and welcome to this episode of Cruzamento Podcast. We are really happy to record another episode in English. In today's show, we will talk about the intersection of digital and healthcare. My name is Daniel Delha, and together with me is my friend and co-host, André Correia.
Hello and welcome. Today we have the pleasure to talk to our guest, Amir. Amir, thank you very much for coming to the show. Welcome to Cruzamento Podcast. Let's start with our usual first question. For those that don't know you, who is Amir?
Thank you for having me. I am a Canadian expat. I am living in Portugal, in Lisbon, where my startup is based, with my Spanish wife. We've been here for a few years now. We absolutely love it. I am, by background and trade, a market researcher, a games publisher, and a tech writer who has covered the spaces of emerging technologies, virtual reality, and emerging ecosystems like Portugal for tech blogs like Virtuleap and TechCrunch. About a couple years ago, I created my own startup in specifically that intersection of fields, a virtual reality therapeutics company that combines neuroscience and virtual reality to address cognitive issues like ADHD, attention deficits of all sorts, cognitive illnesses like Alzheimer's, and in general, just trying to help us as human beings overcome the human condition.
Excellent, Amir. You are, as you just mentioned, an entrepreneur and the founder of Virtuleap,
Yes.
A startup that you just mentioned, operating in the virtual reality field. So can you describe a little bit about Virtuleap? And we will be very keen on understanding why this was founded. And it will be really great if you can explain us what is VR, virtual reality, as a technology.
Yeah, people maybe 5 years ago may have noticed more and more of this, wacky and very big device headset that you would put on your head and wonder what is this all about? And, about 5 years ago, it was really all about next generation gaming, really amazing, immersive experiences where you would get into another reality and play astronaut or fight demons or all of these things. And, in the last few years, what's happened is enterprise use cases have started popping up where, automotives and airlines or surgeons or healthcare practitioners and educators have shown all sorts of really amazing applications for what virtual reality, these devices that are multisensory and allows you to kind of feel like you're actually in another environment, have brought on all these new applications. One of the most critical use cases for virtual reality is healthcare, and the other one is education. It's something that I discovered when I was writing dozens and dozens of articles about virtual reality in all sorts of different sectors and industries. In fact, last year, the FDA in the USA created a new category, medical extended reality, for VR and healthcare. For example, you can use VR to actually serve as an alternative treatment for pain management. For whatever reasons that we're still kind of understanding now, for example, when you're in a virtual reality experience, your pain receptors actually dampen. When your visual sense is believing you're in another reality, your sensation of pain actually reduces. So there's these special, amazing applications that are coming out that makes virtual reality not just a fun thing to do, but actually has a critical use case and very, very amazing and applications across healthcare and education.
Thank you, Amir, for explaining that. It's actually a wonderful world. Looking to your current location, actually, it's quite curious. So Portugal is often seen as a country that has very good talent, but not necessarily an ecosystem that attracts other nationalities to start their own companies as you did. But you've done it differently. So can you tell us why you have chosen Portugal to live and run your own business?
I when I was writing for blogs like Virtuleap, I was studying different markets and different startup ecosystems, especially the emerging ones, especially in Europe, and markets like what's happening in Germany, in Scandinavia, in the Netherlands. And of course, Southern Europe. And one of the markets that I was increasingly kind of attracted and drawn to was Lisbon. More and more we were finding not only a pool of digital nomads that were being attracted to living in a place where you could have a very good quality of life. Mental health is increasingly something that we don't want to compromise ultimate success and not have a quality of life that takes into account many other aspects, of our experience, because they can affect each other and detrimentally when you forego one instead of the other. And so my wife and I, we really were drawn to Lisbon, particularly, I shouldn't be embarrassed to say it, but the sunshine and the weather, the people, the culture, so many things that makes, your day-to-day waking up in a place like this something that is more joyful than necessarily in the winter months, seeing the sun go down at 3 p.m. and people look just awfully grumpy half of the year. That doesn't happen here. And beyond that, and much more seriously, I did research and understand what a great intersection of scientific and technical talent that Portugal has to offer, especially with Lisbon. We have 95% of our team is all based, Portuguese talent. They're game developers, game designers, quality assurance, game testers, neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, machine learning experts. They're all here. And so it is a really amazing base to have a company at an intersection of science and game development. We have everything we need.
Wonderful, Amir. And in that context, and thinking about other vibrant European cities, and we were talking about that a little bit before, do you think Lisbon or other Portuguese city can become an European hub for startups and be the next, let's say, London or Berlin?
Yeah, it's such a tricky question because I see it as a big painting with all these different ingredients kind of stooping together. And I think increasingly people are working in companies that are so remote based. Talent is distributed across continents and different regions. And there's a real fine line of how much does now, especially during a post-COVID world, how much you really need a central location on site where everyone is. It's a big debate on that question. But that said, our company, for example, sees a lot of great connections to working with, obviously, as close time zone as possible. It really helps, when we look ahead at Barcelona and their ecosystem, and if we want to work with them 1 hour ahead, and most of Europe is really within that period. And we like to work with all of those different ecosystems. But whether Lisbon in and of itself, begins to rival other ecosystems, it's a really hard one to say because, some of them are so darn pre-established. London, I would say, is not even a city. It's actually a country. Side by side to the UK. If you take all of the UK and then compare it to London, I think London's still bigger in terms of investment year on year. I think Silicon Valley is number 1, New York's number 2 in the world in terms of investment capital, and then there's London. So it's a really unfair example. But if we were to talk about Barcelona and Berlin, I would say that in 5 to 10 years, I wouldn't be so surprised that Lisbon would grow to something to rival in terms of investment and also in terms of drawing talent here. And one of the key reasons I would say that's the case, I wouldn't actually completely agree with what I just said if it wasn't for this, is the wide English-speaking culture of Portuguese, especially Portuguese talent, youth. They are so remarkably English-speaking, particularly, I think, because, the country doesn't dub the audio of English-speaking movies. I think that was a real boon. But, if I were to have my base in Barcelona or most of Spain, English-speaking talent would be much, much harder to find.
No, that's great. And it just reminds me of an old school teacher who said that not having dubs on movies would help us reading more and also training our hearing for foreign languages. But also talking about countries and cities, in a recent episode with Margarida Bajanca and João Mendes Rotter, we actually discussed about building bridges between Portugal and, in that specific episode, with Israel, which in itself is a country with a good, vibrant startup ecosystem. Would bridges like these between Portugal and other countries actually work? And where could Portugal benefit from such agreements and initiatives?
Yeah, I know Tel Aviv, and again, is a city that is remarkable. I'm not sure about Israel as a whole, because I always hear Tel Aviv as a city. And it's amazing the amount of talent and innovation that comes from there. But if you look at the amount of investment they get, it's really insanely an outlier compared to many other cities and markets in Europe and the Middle East, of course. Now, a bridge, it seems like a complicated thing to me. A lot of things start off with very high appealing slogans and great ideas and intentions. And then it's really hard to execute and see whether those kind of bridges do work out. I think the devil's in the details. What exactly is happening? What sectors are they targeting? Are they focused or are they broadly focused? Whenever I see broad efforts, they usually fizzle allow, but if they're really laser targeted, for example, Portugal is very focused on at the moment incentivizing tourism-based startups, and that might be a smart thing to do, but it might not be a smart thing, to do. And the devil's in the details of what is the advantage if you have an ecosystem like Israel, and what is their particular composition of talent and strengths, and then what is the same in Lisbon, and do they complement one another? Do they completely target different things? I mean, I would think that it's a really great and interesting study to be able to do that comparison analysis. But regardless, that kind of effort is always wholesome and worthwhile. I would think that there would have to be positive results from the effort. And as long as they learn things as they're going, I'm sure there's a lot of fruits and treasures to be had by both ecosystems.
Learn things. And let's bring that for our conversation back to Virtuleap and look more into the technology you are working with your team. So you talk a little bit, before about what virtual reality is. It will be great if you can recap a bit, and specifically, how can Virtuleap help patients with their treatments? Can VR replace the medicines in some areas?
Sure. Virtual reality is the first digital format that actually triggers our autonomic nervous system into believing that the experience is real. So, for example, why did I get into this space specifically? Well, I have a phobia of heights, and I've had a lot of issues in my earlier years with getting on planes and things like this. And in fact, virtual reality was one of the things that actually desensitized me from that. It was called exposure therapy, and it actually allowed me to overcome to a very high degree my own fear of heights. And so it's a mesmerizing application where my autonomic nervous system believes that I'm actually standing on the top of a very tall building. And so my knees buckle and shake because my phobia of heights is triggered, because my vestibular balance system thinks I'm on that in that environment. My proprioception thinks this is my arms. All of the nonverbal parts of our human circuitry, the part that isn't our conscious ego that knows you're in your living room, those other parts actually do think that you're in that other environment. And so, for example, if you had a phobia of, well, a lot of people have a slight phobia of spiders or rats, right? And if you're in a VR simulation and you don't like rats, and you have a rat coming to you and it's done in the right way, you will scream. Or at least, you'll do something embarrassing if anyone's watching around you. And that's the magic of VR. So our company Virtuleap is really driven based on neuroscience principles, and specifically in the area of cognitive assessment. We're essentially trying to take this to the next level.
In the pharmaceutical world, for example, regulations are a very important element in the drugs approval process. And thinking about what you just described for Virtuleap and VR as a way of treatment, how important is validation and all the regulations around in order to make the technology of Virtuleap available to the market?
If it wasn't for COVID, I would say things would go a little bit more slowly. But ever since, this biblical plague hit us, the regulatory bodies like FDA, DIGA in Germany, all across the world, they've all kind of greased their wheels in accepting digital therapeutics much more, they've opened their arms a little bit wider than they may have before, meaning they are making things easier for digital therapeutics to be, validated, to be supported, to be given funds and access to funds. A lot of these things we're noticing, specifically Germany and their regulatory body, DIGA, that seems to be particularly trying to facilitate companies that have experimental digital therapeutics. And virtual reality ultimately is the next generation of that digital therapeutic. Because what is virtual reality but a digital format that actually is embodied? And therefore, the quality of the data is that much higher because you're that much more engaged in a compelling experience, but also your body believes that experience is real. So the fidelity is just off the charts compared to any other digital format. So I believe all the regulatory bodies, what we'll see, especially in this year and the next, is wave after wave of phase 1 studies showing very positive results across the spectrum of applications for pain management or phobias or isolation therapy, for cognitive modification, exercises and the like. And doctors will start very slowly, probably not for the next couple of years, start even instead of prescribing like a knee-jerk reaction of a US physician to a drug right away, they'll try to maybe pair it with a drug where, you also have a digital therapy as a companion diagnostic or something like this. I think you're going to see kind of more hybrids coming up in the beginning, but not like full-on replacing pharmaceutical drugs. I think pharma drugs and this practice is tried and true.
And I mean, so therefore, how will that work? So you go to a doctor, the doctor will give you a pill, and then they will give you an app so that you can combine both, or?
I think exactly that will be the initial kind of way that we'll see it. I think from the point of view of adherence, and then this, I think there's going to be also later on when you're using that app, even a synergy effect, some kind of marginal outcome that by using the app along with the drug, there's some kind of synergy of positive, incremental outcome because you are pairing something that is engaging you as well as you participating in a program that has you taking this particular, concoction. But I think exactly how you describe it, you'll just simply be prescribed an application that is paired with the pharmaceutical.
Wow, it does make sense. And we were talking about Portugal before as well, and maybe it's a good place to test some of those elements. In fact, in last years, Portugal has attracted some startups. Yours is one example somehow, and large corporations. Cruzamento podcast has several non-Portuguese listeners. We would like to bring everyone into this conversation, and therefore we are recording some of the episodes in English. So, Amir, if you would have to convince our listeners living abroad to come to Portugal, what would you tell them?
When you're in a very big pond that has pre-established rules and a huge history, for example, the US, it's hard to change things. There's a lot of incumbents. And then you have like new markets, emerging markets, ecosystems that are young, but thriving and growing very fast and very, very open to change and open for new voices. And so when you look at an ecosystem like Lisbon, the benefit is not what's pre-established, but what it wants to be and what it wants to become. And therefore, there's a lot of partnerships that can be more easily drawn and people that you can more easily reach out to because they're more welcoming because they want to create something together collaboratively with flavors from all around the world. As long as they have the right energy and they're ultimately resonating with one another towards the same path. So, your voices will be heard here. The kind of change that you want to bring here will be welcomed. And I think you will see much more warm reception than a lot of other markets that may be at a different chapter in their evolution.
And Amir, one of the topics that is often described and discussed in these conversations is about prevention. And I think in a certain way, we have covered prevention and the benefits of virtual reality and Virtuleap, therefore, to prevent some of these phobias, as you mentioned, and other treatments as well. Would you like to share your thoughts about prevention from a healthcare system standpoint? And in particular, how can startups help that prevention of the disease before even getting there?
Physical health is one thing we really understand pretty well. It's like we know going for a run or at least a brisk walk and getting some fresh air and go maybe by the seaside, all those things we get it. And a Mediterranean diet doesn't harm you, right? And social contact, we know isolation is worse than like a really severe isolation for seniors, for example, can be worse than a pack of cigarettes and stuff like this. Okay. But mental health, I would suppose, is something we don't really think about. We kind of forget about it until it's the most important thing. I think Japan is the only market that I've seen the opposite. It's by law mandatory to do a cognitive assessment once a year if you're employed. That's 82% of the population. But for the rest of the world, we don't see that other half. We see physical health, but we don't see mental health until mental health is broken. But, I think that needs to change. I think we need to go back to those, old mystical analogies of the body and mind being much more interconnected than we usually realize. I think how we think and how we feel needs to be more acknowledged. I think the pandemic has a shadow pandemic of mental health. And I think that's going to be a big theme of this year. So prevention is not so much something that we have to just save the physical body, but having much more conscious of what's happening in our heads and what's happening in our hearts, and not in the fuzzy way, really more practical way. I'm in an accelerator right now that's dedicated to mental health startups. It's called the What If Fellowship. It started about 4 weeks ago, and it's all mental health startups across the board addressing this particular issue. So prevention, from my point of view, is really seeing yourself in that dualistic side and always paying attention to what's happening up in your head and the stressful days that we're all going through right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And one should not forget about the importance of mental health. And obviously, we've mentioned COVID a couple of times, and during this pandemic, it is a question to ask. So how is your startup dealing with COVID and in the time of COVID?
It's, last week, for example, we had calls with some of our staff, and it was actually quite sad to realize how little I had really realized how much of an impact it had just for some of our members, some of our team members who are single, for example. The disruption to your normal routines, it can be a huge negative impact. And I started realizing, because from my point of view, I'm not single. I have someone to share this prison cell with me most of the time, and that can go a long way. So I see it with my team. I see it outside. There's even the unconscious presence of the situation that kind of seeps into you as well. The mental health crisis, I think, is going to be a big theme of this year, and how we individually address it, how we acknowledge it. I think we have to start communicating with each other more. I think we have to start talking very clearly about what's happening in our communities more. These are things, again, like what I mentioned about Japan and us not thinking about mental health. I think right now it's the most important thing. And for us to talk to each other more, to bring it up more, to not make it a taboo subject, because it is a taboo subject. No one wants to bring it up.
That's lovely. And we were about to ask you here an important question related with leadership. And we often talk about leadership in big corporates, in big companies. And now we have here an example, and you were describing some real examples. And we are very curious. Can you tell us a little bit about how leadership is viewed from a startup point of view, Amir?
Yeah. When you're like a 3-person team, it can be a weird topic to bring up because it's just a matter of egos, and usually in a 3-people team, each one is kind of equal in the equation of workload and importance. But then when you get to our size, which is about 12 people, 10 full-time, 2 part-time, you suddenly have the need for really leadership with a capital L. You need a person who is paying attention, not just to what's being done individually, but what's happening collectively. You have to start paying attention to the individual from their point of view of their career trajectory. Why are they there at your company? What do they want to do? Are they in a company like Virtuleap because they believe in what we're doing? If so, then that needs to be nurtured. They have to be nurtured from where do they want to go with this? Where do they see themselves in X number of years? These are the things that a leader, in my opinion, needs to be paying attention, because ultimately they are like members of your family, especially at a 12-member team. I have no idea what it's like to be a leader for a 100-person organization or a 100,000-person organization. I don't necessarily want to think about that right now, but it certainly probably has similar themes echo up to those stages as well.
Fantastic. Amir, thank you so much for your time and availability. We are really, really excited to have you here, and we are learning a lot. Also, thank you for sharing your thoughts about what makes an entrepreneur choose Portugal and is her own base. All the best for your business. We really mean it. We will put Amir's website in the show notes. So please, to everybody that listens to us, please pay attention to it. The very last one, Amir. So if people want to find you online, how could they do that?
If I was them, search me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is actually, I'm a heavy user on LinkedIn. In fact, the reason I'm on this podcast is because I stalked Daniel on LinkedIn. So follow my example, search Amir, and I just copy and paste my giant Arnold Schwarzenegger Iranian name and plug it in, copy and paste it into LinkedIn, and I will be happy to add you on there and start a conversation.
Right. Thanks a lot, Amir. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you also for all our listeners to listening to our episode. Please let us know what you've thought about it over at LinkedIn, Twitter, or by email. All these details will be available in the show notes or at cruzamentopodcast.com. Thank you very much all, and see you later.
See you later.